The ground did not collapse in a single night. It moved slowly, quietly, like something breathing beneath the soil. Fences tilted first. Then roads softened. Then entire houses began to sink as if pulled by invisible hands. By the time the maps were printed, the town was already half gone. And within a generation, it would be as if it had never existed at all. In the 1880s, deep in the wetlands of the southeastern United States, a small frontier town stood on what settlers believed was firm, fertile land. It was built between cypress trees and shallow waterways, closed to timber and trade routes. Families arrived with wagons, tools, and church bells. They named the place Dry Creek. Within 20 years, the swamp began to take it back. In the late 19th century, the American South was still expanding into its wetlands. Logging companies and homesteaders pushed deeper into regions that maps described only as marsh or unclaimed. Land was cheap, sometimes free. To many families, it looked like opportunity. Dry Creek began as a logging outpost. A narrow wooden dock was built along a slow black water channel. Flatboats carried cypress logs downstream to sawmills. A general store followed. Then a boarding house. Then a church made from rough pine planks. By 1883, more than 100 people lived there. The ground seemed solid enough. A layer of packed soil covered the marsh. Grass grew thick and green. Horses could walk without sinking. That was proof enough for most settlers. They raised homes on short wooden piers, dug shallow wells, built fences, planted corn and beans along the higher ridges. For a few years, life felt stable. Children attended lessons in a one-room schoolhouse. Steam whistles from logging camps echoed at dawn. On Sundays, smoke rose from chimneys while families gathered for sermons and shared meals. Boats passed regularly. Mail arrived twice a week. But small signs appeared early. Water collected where it had not before. Ditches refused to drain. Fence posts leaned after heavy rains. The soil felt soft underfoot even during dry months. The older trappers warned them. They said the land floated, that the swamp moved, that entire tree lines could shift after a season of storms. But the newcomers dismissed these stories as superstition. They trusted their measurements, their shovels, their maps. So the town kept growing. More timber was cut. Trees that once held the soil together were removed. Roots rotted underground. Channels widened. The water had more room to spread. No one noticed how the earth changed color. From brown to dark gray. From firm to spongy. Wagon wheels began to leave deeper tracks each month. By 1887, the boardwalks had to be rebuilt twice. Not because of rot. Because the supports were sinking. Still, nobody talked about leaving. The harvests were good. The logging profitable. The graves of loved ones already lay behind the church. This was home. And homes were not abandoned for something as uncertain as soft ground. So they stayed. And the swamp waited. The changes came slowly enough that they could be explained away. A collapsed shed. A tilted porch. A flooded cellar after an unusually hard rain. Each problem had a simple cause. Or so they told themselves. They added more planks to the walkways. Raised houses higher on posts. Dug longer drainage trenches that filled again within days. Every solution lasted a little less than the one before. Then the wells began to fail. Water turned dark, bitter, sometimes oily at the surface. Buckets brought up mud instead of clear liquid. Several families started hauling drinking water from the river, boiling it over stoves. Mosquitoes multiplied. Livestock avoided certain fields. Cows refused to cross patches of ground that looked perfectly normal. One mule stepped forward and disappeared up to its chest in black muck. It took 6 men with ropes to pull it out. At night, people heard sounds. Low cracks. Wet sucking noises. The slow shift of wood against wood. Houses settling. By 1891, the schoolhouse floor had warped so badly that desks slid toward one corner. The teacher nailed boards across the worst gaps. Children joked that the building was leaning toward the swamp. It was not a joke for long. A heavy summer storm struck that year. Rain fell for 3 days without stopping. The creek overflowed. Water moved through the streets like a shallow river. When it receded, nothing sat level anymore. The church tower tilted. The general store door would not close. A section of the dock had vanished entirely, swallowed by the water. Town meetings were held by lantern light. Some argued for relocation. Others refused. Moving meant abandoning crops, buildings, and years of work. There was also pride. Admitting the land was wrong felt like admitting failure. So they compromised. They decided to build higher, stronger, longer posts, thicker beams. They believed elevation would save them. More trees were cut to make the lumber. With every tree removed, the soil loosened further. More channels formed. More water seeped upward. The ground began to tremble under wagon traffic. Then came the first disappearance. A small smokehouse near the edge of town simply wasn't there one morning. No debris. No broken wood. Just a smooth patch of black water where it had stood. People stopped walking alone after that. They kept lanterns burning late into the night. And for the first time, they spoke the word quietly. Sink. The end arrived without warning. It started before dawn. A cold fog hung low over the swamp, thick enough to hide the tree line. The air smelled sour and metallic. Dogs barked, then went silent. Several residents later said they felt the ground vibrate, like distant thunder that never came. Then the earth opened. Not dramatically. Not with cracks or explosions. It simply gave way. One house near the creek sank straight down. Slowly. The posts slid into the mud as if pushed from below. Inside, a family scrambled out through a window while the floor dropped beneath them. Within minutes only the roof was visible. Then that too disappeared. People ran into the street. Barefoot. Half-dressed. Boards split. Wells collapsed inward. Sections of the road folded like wet paper. The church bell rang wildly as someone tried to gather everyone together. Midway through the ringing, the tower tilted sharply and fell, vanishing into the sludge with a dull splash. Boats tied at the dock broke free as the shoreline shifted. The entire bank slid several feet toward the water. It was not a flood. It was sinking. The ground itself moving downward. Families grabbed what they could carry. Bibles. Tools. Blankets. Some tried to save furniture. Others dragged children through knee-deep mud toward the higher trees. Carts became useless. Wheels locked in place. Horses panicked and refused to move. A woman screamed for her husband when their kitchen dropped through the floor. He never resurfaced. By midday, nearly a third of the town was gone. Where streets had been, there were now dark pools. Oil-slick water. Floating planks. the tops of fences sticking out like broken ribs. The remaining residents did not argue anymore. They fled. A line of people moved north along the narrow ridge trail, looking back only once, watching their homes tilt and vanish one by one. No fire, no smoke, just silence, and the slow swallowing sound of the swamp closing over everything they had built. By sunset, Dry Creek was no longer a town. It was only water and scattered wood. The map still showed streets, but nothing stood there anymore. Within weeks, the people of Dry Creek were scattered across the region, settling with relatives or finding temporary work in logging camps and river towns farther north. What they carried with them was little more than tools, a few pieces of clothing, and whatever documents had survived the escape. Furniture, crops, and most of their belongings were simply left behind, swallowed by mud or abandoned to the rising water. There had been no time to organize a proper departure, no time to collect records or preserve the history of the place. The town ended not with a ceremony or a farewell, but with a hurried walk away from ground that could no longer be trusted. Officials briefly noted the disaster in county reports, describing it as unstable terrain and seasonal flooding. The language was dry and technical. No names were listed. No losses were counted in detail. Within a year, the post route was redirected and the settlement was quietly removed from new survey maps. On paper, Dry Creek became a blank space again, the same empty marsh it had once been before the first dock was built. Nature worked more efficiently than any erasure. The remaining structures settled deeper each season. Roofs collapsed under their own weight. Timber softened, darkened, and dissolved into the water. Grass spread over former streets. Cypress knees pushed up through what had been gardens and yards. By the time hunters passed through the area a decade later, they could find only fragments of worked wood and the occasional piece of rusted iron hidden beneath the reeds. Without knowing what to look for, a traveler would never guess that families had once lived there. The graves behind the church were lost first. The markers tilted, then sank, then vanished entirely beneath silt and standing water. With them disappeared the last fixed points that tied the land to memory. Survivors rarely spoke about Dry Creek. Some said it felt like a bad season that had simply ended. Others avoided the subject altogether. Children who grew up elsewhere knew the story only as something vague and distant, a place their parents mentioned once and then forgot. By the early 20th century, the town existed only in a few fading ledgers and in the recollection of those who were growing old. After they were gone, nothing remained to prove it had ever stood there. The swamp lay flat and quiet. Unbroken water, trees, wind, and no sign that a town had ever tried to live on that ground at all.